Stay out the office every day.
Welcome to Out of Office, where we keep it real after work. I'm Jay Mills, here with
Queen V, Shirelle,
and last but not least, Miss Tay.
So I'm super excited about this episode. We're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like a lot of people experience, but it's not a big conversation that we have within our community. So we're going to be talking about anxiety. And I think as we've talked about expectations in the workplace, we talked about social media, sometimes you see the highs of someone's life, but you never know what they're actually going through. So I feel like this is a fruitful conversation. I can't wait to dive into it. And on this episode, as in previous ones, we have a special guest.
Woo!
Special guest.
Ding, ding, ding.
Introduce yourselves to our OOO viewers with your name, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay, well, my name is Jonathan. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I work in government.
Okay, in the government, good. All right, so as I said, we're going to be talking about anxiety, and what I really hope that we can get to through this conversation today is like, how does anxiety manifest itself? How do we cope? And what do those experiences look like for us? So hopping into the conversation, now that we're in our career, have you experienced anxiety due to workplace expectations?
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. That's where I take my first sip.
I know. Might take a double shot.
Yes, because I think, and not to make all of our conversations about race, but I think especially being like Black millennials in the workplace too, and feeling like, and similar to some of the things that we talked about previously, where we set our expectations for ourselves higher than other people's. So whenever there's like an inkling of you're not even meeting your peers or your coworkers' expectations, I feel like I automatically go into panic mode. Like I'm doing something wrong, like it just start freaking out and try to. It sometimes will take a couple of days for me to get back into the groove of things. So.
To be frank, for me, I think the first time I ever experienced true anxiety was because of my workplace expectations here in the city in my new role. I had never really known what exactly anxiety was. Like, obviously you know about it, you hear about it. I have friends that go through it. But that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm not meeting this expectation that's set of me, and this fear of failure that you constantly work into, and you're like walking into your workplace like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything right, and you're trying to hide and play this facade this entire time like everything's fine, and you're really not doing okay. That was the first time I've experienced something like this, and it was at work.
Well, I mean, for me, I experienced anxiety throughout college, actually for a majority of my life, but when I got into the workplace, I felt like my anxiety went from like a 50 to like a 95. And I can't even say, I don't think the word I should use is expectations, but it's really just the fact that, like you guys had mentioned, I had like my own internal pressure, and then when you get into a role, they expect you to be the subject matter expert. Like, people don't know that you just came into your role until you tell them, so they're just like, hey, like, Shirelle, like, do you know this? What's the answer to this? Can you do this? And so it takes almost pretty much like a full year for you to even understand your role fully, which is what most people told me, but just the fact that I'm so used to excelling, every day I felt like I was crying, like every day for the first like 2 months, because I was just like, I don't know this, why am I not catching on as quickly? I don't even know how to articulate myself all the way because I'm trying to catch on to the jargon, so my anxiety was just like, whoo, like
similar to Cheyenne, like coming into the workplace wasn't like my first experience with anxiety. It's something that I've dealt with since I was a little girl, college to now. And I think another aspect to being in the workplace is just being energized by your job as well. And for me, I wasn't having that in my, first role out of college, and then being away from your support system and just having to wake up. We spend most of our day at work. Like you have to wake up and go to this job, and you're not 100% energized by it. You also don't know what's going on. You're still learning. And then there are those expectations for you to excel. So then you have all this pressure, and then on top of that, a lot of times my anxiety comes from uncertainty, and so like not knowing like what's going to be next, or if I don't like this, what do I like, and just placing all this pressure on myself, and then you start to overthink, and then the anxiety just comes, and then before you know, you're like, what in the world is going on? And
see, my anxiety came from not necessarily like this lack of uncertainty. It was more so like me being exposed one time. Like I received a piece of feedback that I was literally underperforming, and I had never received anything like that in my life, and like not to say I'm like, oh, I'm perfect, but I had always been an overachiever. You know, I wasn't used to people like calling out my failure in a way or misunderstanding me and having this perception of me that's not what I wanted to bring out. So that moment of like exposure was led to my anxiety. It was like, oh my gosh, like people don't think I'm this way anymore. Oh my gosh, people don't think I know what I'm doing. All of a sudden you get wrapped up into this whole like, who am I again? And you kind of lose yourself in this anxiety because you're perpetuating what other people think you are. So I think that was the hardest piece for me.
I mean, just with uncertainty, it's kind of just like, I feel like for the first time in my life, I realized the sky is not the limit. I got a certain major, I'm in a certain place, I'm in a certain role right now. So I can only jump so far if I'm unhappy in the place I am right now. And so like going back to that uncertainty where it's just like, did I pick like the right career path? Like, am I in the right industry? Like, what am I doing? And honestly, I still have anxiety to this day because I'm still trying to think like, ooh, you're saying this right now and you still don't know what you're gonna do next.
And I think with anxiety, it could be how it manifests is different ways, but it could be one little thing and then you keep thinking about that and you think and think and think and think and then you're all the way to the point of like, why did I even go to college? Why did I even major in this? Am I supposed to be in this career? Like you just all the way over there and it's just like, girl, just chill. Like we're gonna figure it out, but it's hard.
And then
But
what about you? Because I think we all have very, very corporate like experiences at work, but the public sector could be a little bit different. So how does that look?
Anxiety actually isn't like a bad thing. It's an important trigger. It's supposed to allow you to check in with yourself. And I've had to learn that in the work that I do. Now that I've been in my career almost like 5-ish years and then like went through graduate school, worked as an intern, as a fellow. For me, it was always like, am I checking with myself as a fight or flight moment? Or fight or flight moment. Am I running from something or am I running towards something? Like, how do I actually have to like navigate that work in my field. And knew what I wanted to do. It was like eventually I want to be a city manager and work in government. It was actually like things that I actually like to do. And my first like checkpoint of knowing like this was interesting was the first time in my life a white man said to me, "You actually good at this and you can really go really far in life." And I was like, I've never heard a white person or a white man in general ever say anything good about me. And that was like my check-in point. But then even after this experience, I had experiences where I would come to work and it would struggle, or my voice would be dimmed, or I would quiet my voice, or I wouldn't always necessarily bring my best or my best self out of it, knowing like there was actually things that I could actually achieve. Because I would feel this twinge of anxiety, like, well, if I speak up, everybody in the room is going to think I'm dumb. So now I'm going to be quiet about it, or I'm not going to put like my actual thought process into what I do in my work. So that anxiety point that you had, like, it's a check-in point. It's like, what am I doing? Am I about to run from something? Or am I about to run towards something? How am I feeling? Is it true? Is it valid? Where am I in this present moment? And then just like manage that.
So has your anxiety always been healthy then? That's what you're saying?
No.
You said, oh, it's just checking points, and I'm like, okay, that sounds healthy
I
to
think
me.
that's a good point to make, but then I think it goes further that when you are having that check-in point, how are you then coping with your anxiety? Because I think it's that, do you allow that anxiety to take over, and it like takes over into the sense of like you're struggling day in and day out, and it's not like a check-in in a positive way, but it's affecting your mental health outside of like, you know, the workplace and your day-to-day interactions with people. I think is a good point as well.
I mean, I could say for me that my anxiety comes more from like personal life from childhood, like initial separation anxiety, some abandonment things that I've kind of grown up with. But like professional sense of anxiety is that feeling like that I've always had still, but of like not being good enough or not being capable of enough. There was one point in my career where I went to a room and was like, I'm just glad I'm not the dumbest person in the room. And like that's the worst negative like cycle to go into. So I'm just learning that now, but it's like actually breaking that cycle and going through like therapy that I've been going through for like the past 7 months of like actually thinking about like how do you actually like acknowledge your feelings in the moment, how mindful you are of like what your feelings and where they actually go, and are you actually like in those negative feelings you're like ruminating about them and then they become you and you envelop in them and then you're just paralyzed, or are you actually like acknowledging it and looking at the actual reality and then moving forward from there?
Can I ask you a follow-up question? So because I feel like anxiety in therapy is like stigmatized amongst our community. So like especially I feel like now for Black women it's like more in to go to therapy. But like as a Black man, I'm sure that you've like experienced difference, or at least I would imagine so. So can you tell me more about like your view of therapy and like how you kind of went into that and what your perspective is on that.
I mean, it's a journey. Like I personally say like we don't talk about our feelings in general. We're not trained to. We're not taught to. We suck at it for a very, very long time.
Y'all still do.
Yeah, y'all do.
Then we get in a position where people actually want us to talk about our feelings, and sometimes that reaction of okay, now we're like throwing everything up, and people are like, whoa, 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 we didn't ask for all of that, and so then you like block it all away and say, well, I can't be vulnerable or be this or be that person. But my journey to therapy was very much like having setbacks in my 20s and like having things that I was like sabotaging in my life, personally and professionally, and then finally getting to the point like this year of looking in the mirror and I was like, who actually am I? I have no clue. And who do I actually want to be? I have no clue. I can't necessarily like go to family or friends for that because they're gonna tell me every which thing that's not perfect for me, but I need somebody to allow me to like speak up for my own self. And I actually reached out to my friends, and actually like my guy friends, I reached out to them because a lot of them were actually going to therapy. I didn't really realize that, and I was like, well, who do I go to? And they were able to refer me to a great therapist, and my therapist has actually been great. I've been able to talk about like a gamut of issues from like my personal life, and like just retelling my own story, and that story's helped me to say like, well, this is why I reacted this way, or this is how I act in this office, or this is the professional setting that's the most comfortable to me.
Like once you actually open up yourself to the conversation of therapy, how much comfort you can get and support you can get from other people, and realize that other people are going to therapy too. Because I feel like that's the hardest step, is just being able to even say it out loud. Because then I feel like just within the Black community, therapy, I mean, it's definitely increasing with the amount of people that are open to it, but I still feel like there's a stigma. It's like, well, why can't you just talk to your friends and your family or figure it out? Like, why don't you just figure it out? But then I feel like, but therapy is progressing, but I feel like the options of having like a psychiatrist, that's still like not talked about at all. Because I mean, when I was in college, I was diagnosed with like clinical depression and ADD, like anxiety being a byproduct of that. And so it's kind of just like, girl, like, you know, go to therapy, talk to your friends, like find coping mechanisms, but don't take pills though. Like, and so it's kind of just like being able to jump over that hurdle as well, is where it's just kind of like there's a chemical imbalance sometimes. Not saying everybody has that, but just like being able to even start that conversation, to me personally, has been like pretty hard. It still is.
And listening to both of you when you talk about like your friends and family and how they view anxiety and mental health, I know I talked about therapy to some people in my family, and it kind of was like, well, I'm telling you what to do. You just have to think positive thoughts. You have to do this, and it's like,
if it was that easy, I would have done it.
Yeah, if it was that easy, I would have done it. So just a bigger conversation. How do you feel like mental health and anxiety is viewed overall within our community?
I think Shirelle really hit it on the head, where we're being, and I think our increased acceptance of therapy just really goes with the increase of like education, but there's still that level that we have to get to about accepting medication for it. I mean, but that goes back in history in terms of just from ways that we've been wronged in our government's like medical society, that we're not very trusting, we're not very trusting of somebody like medicating us and us not completely understanding the diagnosis. And that's where like mental health is hard, because if you're in like an operating room, or if you're with a surgeon, like you can physically see like a broken bone and what's wrong with you, and they can tell you exactly how to fix it, but you can't do that with mental health. And with it not being as tangible, it can be really hard to be trusting. And I think that's a big part in terms of psychiatry, where like if somebody's telling you, you know, like clinical depression, like you're like, okay, well, I'm upset, but to what level is it that I need that extra support or that extra care? And it's kind of hard and tricky, and something that all of us have to kind of accept in ourselves, let alone like society accept, like, okay, she's okay.
Right. Maybe you're just overreacting. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, like in Caribbean households, you say you're gonna take a pill for something, they be like, what? Like they will literally pills, even when you're sick, you could be on your deathbed, and Caribbean parents are still gonna be like, nah, you're gonna take this soup. So let you come home and tell them you got anxiety. They be like, what's that? Okay, cool, I'm gonna pray on you, I'm gonna throw some holy water on you. And it's like, that's why I think I've personally never gone to therapy. Because it's a stigma in my culture, in my family. It's like, those are things, you just deal with it. You have this lineage of women who fought through this, who've done this, you could deal with it because you're equipped because it's in your lineage. It's like, that's cool, but like, dang, like, so basically when I stress out over something, I can't stress out because I have to be perfect. And it's like,
How does your anxiety manifest itself, and what are some of the triggers?
Well, I know for me how it manifests itself. It's like, and this is how I knew my anxiety was starting to become unhealthy versus healthy. I can barely sleep at night. I was only getting 4 hours of sleep. I constantly had racing thoughts. My heart rate kept increasing. I was starting to get like aches and pains. Like it was like physical symptoms. Like that's how bad my anxiety was getting. And then I just realized I was starting to, since I was trying to hide that from my friends, like Queen V was saying, then I was starting to get short with people. My temper was starting to get a little off the handle, and you guys already know that I be, you know. So, and so the way I've been coping, like we already said, going to therapy, going to a psychiatrist, being a little bit more open with my friends about it, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out ways to cope. Like I don't.
Well, so I'll talk about both like the coping and I guess manifestation since you hit that. My issue is that I definitely put on that facade that you mentioned earlier, both to like other people and myself. So I don't necessarily see or acknowledge the manifestation until I've had that like running over the pot issue where like you either hit that last nerve and you just like start crying at the smallest thing, or like you said, your temper gets really, really short with everybody, and then you're finally like, whoa, what the heck am I doing?
Right.
Or maybe even, I forget the technical term for it, but when you're feeling something and you're pouring it into different actions. So maybe you do start like going out more, or like you do have excessive drinking, or like you know someone or something is a major distraction for you and you start doing that a little bit more. But again, for me, I don't want to say never, but until recently, I hadn't noticed those things until it was like running over, and I had like a big point where I had to do that U-turn. The triggers for me, to be honest, I'm not sure I'm aware of all of them yet. I think just because I always see my symptoms so late in the game, but a lot of them are work related. I would say some of them are socially related too. Uncertainty is something that bothers me to my core. And now going into a spot where you're not having school tell you what you're supposed to do every year, almost like every month. I feel like it was that structure to it just being open for the rest of your life. I can tell that's starting to feed into my daily stressors too.
I think similar to Shirelle, my anxiety manifests itself in physical ways. So nosebleeds, like it physically affects me, and then that leads me to isolating myself from people. So I like to stay in my room a lot. Like I will literally just stay in my bed. It's very hard for me to get up. But in terms of trying not to isolate myself, I try to cope with a support system. But similar to what you were saying earlier, sometimes that could be a burden to those people because you're constantly going to them with their problems, and they're constantly have to check in on you. And it's always good sometimes to ask other people like, how are you? Not always going to them with your problems. And so then I'm like, oh, I've called them 3-4 times in a row talking about the same thing. Like I know they're tired of me. So I feel like I have to find new ways to cope with that. And similar to people on this panel, I've started therapy as well because I felt like I read The Defining Decade actually, and it was a really good book. And it's a therapist, and she was using examples to the book about like people going to therapy. And I was like, wow, I really should sit down and talk to someone, because I think the biggest trigger for me is that uncertainty, like I said, and also just like a lack of not knowing where I want to go sometimes. Like we talked about in expectations versus reality, like you just don't know everything, and I have a problem with not knowing. I feel like I have to have a structure to everything, and because I can't see the future, those are the triggers really that get to me. I think also a big thing with anxiety and mental health is that you see people and you wouldn't even know what they're going through. So most people will look at me and they'll see me on social media, they'll see me out and about, and they don't know that, you know, maybe at night I couldn't wake up that next morning because I was shaking excessively and my mind was racing.
So I feel like I personally get anxiety when I'm not around other people sometimes. Like there's a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I can go travel alone, I can go to the movies alone, I can go out to eat alone, and I personally could not imagine myself doing that. Like I get anxiety when I like am sitting somewhere out to eat alone, like with no one, and I just get on my phone and I'll just start like, I'll call someone, or you know, sometimes when I'm in my room for too long, like not talking to someone, I really have to catch myself and be like, oh my gosh, like why do I constantly feel like I have to be talking to someone or be around someone else, be around my friends, be around my family? And I think that's part of like being in a new city has taught me that and revealed that to me, because I've never been really alone. I've always been around people. Like I've always shared a room with like a sibling or had a roommate. Like I've always had that. And so when I finally moved out of that comfort zone and I was forced in situations where I was alone, that's when I recognized, wow, okay, like I really have an issue with being alone. It's something I'm getting through now.
And we've all had experiences with anxiety. So like, what's the biggest piece of advice that you could give our viewers who may be dealing with these types of things right now? Through your experiences and how you cope, how do you think you could help them?
For me, one of the biggest things was just realizing not to use therapy as crisis management, but preventative measures. Like, don't deprioritize your mental health just because people around you think you're okay. Like, that should always be at the top level of your mind, making sure that you're okay.
I definitely say like develop, and something I'm working on, the strongest possible sense of self that you have. Because that's going to be your foundation for whatever you do. And then build as many positive memories as you possibly can.
I think the biggest thing I would say is give yourself some grace, because you're not the only one that is going through this. Like, I think a lot of times we look out and we think that everyone else has it together, and then we put all this pressure on ourselves to feel like we have to figure it out. So I say just give yourself some grace and reach out to those around you. Use your support system and, you know, seek the therapy, even if you feel like, you know, people might judge you, because that's a stigma in our community.
I think another piece of advice that I've learned in my short time living it would just be trying to let go of that spirit of comparison. So I feel like we live in this like Instagram world. We live in this world where like we see everyone just coming up, glowing up, and doing all this stuff. And back to Jay Mills' like main point, like you see everybody's highlight reels and you don't really know what they're going through behind closed doors. So I think for me it's just been letting go of that spirit of comparison and constantly feeling like I need to be like at the same level because this person did it and I have no excuse. Like letting go of that spirit of comparison.
That's real bad.
I would say my final piece of advice is just nothing happens overnight, because I know specifically about encouraging people to do therapy, and I've had this conversation with like a lot of my friends at this point. Something that's really big is like we all think we just want a how-to or like get through this for dummies. And like if I follow these 10 steps, I can walk out next week and be like, all right, my life is perfect. Right. So when you sit with somebody and they're like, their questions are more designed for you to come to your own conclusion, I know that that's difficult for people because they want that quick fix. Or I brought up the doctor conversation, like they want to just be like, oh, I can go through physical therapy or I can take these pills and be okay, when that's not like, it's not that quick. And it's a journey that all depends on yourself.
Well, I think this was an amazing conversation. Like, I think we're all open and vulnerable. Thank you all for sharing your experiences, the things you go through, because as I said, like, there are a lot of people who are watching this who are dealing with these same things, but it's not a big conversation that we always have. So I hope our viewers truly enjoyed this. Thank you all for tuning in to Out of Office. Feel free to subscribe. Actually, do subscribe. And thank you for tuning in.